There we go.
Did you ever see the tube steak rap battle? Where it was like, he kept talking about punching me in the face. What was that? One of the lines was, I'll punch you in your fucking face. Then I'm going to punch you in your fucking face. It's not even a rhyme.
All right. Oh, I can refresh now.
Hey, fresh.
Hey, fresh. Renaissance. Renaissance.
Renaissance.
Dude,
Renaissance sounds pretty good to me.
I'm just going to make sure it's working on the RP Plus site also.
Renaissance sounds pretty good to me.
All right.
Do you want to tilt the camera a little bit there?
What do you want?
Tilt the camera a bit.
Which way?
Like half my face is cut off, so like, Renaissance sounds pretty good to me.
All right.
Do you want to tilt the camera?
Wait, what are you doing? What are you doing?
No, you be quiet. Like half my face is cut off, so like,
Did you see it? It was like,
sweet.
all right.
When is this real? Are you guys starting already? Can I talk stuff?
December 14th, 15th.
Oh, that's
December?
soon.
Uh-huh.
Oh.
That's real soon. You got your flights and stuff already for that?
Nope, but they're going to get that sorted ASAP.
What airlines fly out there?
LL?
All of them.
Yeah, all of them. But
What's LL?
the Israeli airlines, the most secure airline in the world.
Hmm.
They will fucking shoot you. If you fuck
Israel has the most absurdly secure airport on the planet.
They profile everybody. Period. If you're like
Unapologetic.
don't belong, they will find you.
Okay, well, it looks like we're up and running.
Yeah, let's see what do we get the same screen as we usually do?
Yeah, so so they sent out the YouTube link. So for people who aren't on RP Plus, they should be able to watch it on YouTube. And then for RP Plus people, it's also on the website.
Is everyone allowed to ask questions or just the RP Plus people?
I don't really know. How does that work?
Hey, 36 viewers.
Pretty good.
You can open up like the YouTube, just in another link and click on that video.
This one?
Yep, so like right click and open up somewhere else.
Oh, I see. That's where we'll find the comments. Right?
Perhaps. Let us see.
Aha! Patrick Dion letting us know the sound sounds good. Okay, cool. So now we'll have comments from the YouTubers and from RP Plusers, so we can go back and forth as we see fit.
Cool.
I'm just going to scoop them together so we can do it like this. All right, we got some good ones going on right here.
So do we want to kind
Croatia.
of do a background on the book?
Yeah, we'll do a quick, like book stuff, and then maybe walk through some of the book stuff.
Sweet.
And then
Yeah.
do
So
the live questions.
Do you want to chat about why we wrote the book, stuff like that, and really quick?
Yeah, for sure. So first off, for all of you, obviously, I'm pretty sure at least most of you have bought the book. That's why you're here in the first place. We want to say thank you, of course, for purchasing our book, and we really hope that you enjoy it and you can find it really useful for not only yourself, but if you train people, if you coach people, hopefully you can learn a few things to help better all those different programs that you might be running. So thank you, and we really hope that you get a lot out of it. The reason why we made this book was because we had a hard time conveying
Making money, and we need it. Oh,
well, we're desperate for yes, that too. But one of the things that we really we had a hard time conveying in our practice and when speaking to other strength conditioning and sports science professionals, this idea that there's kind of an upper limit, there's an upper boundary to how much stuff you can do, right? And most of us have kind of experienced this one way, shape, or form And unfortunately, for Mike and I, we experienced it not only in our own training, like we've certainly pushed our boundaries of our own training, but we've also watched it happen to people who were maybe not in control. Maybe they were being coached by somebody, and clearly they're at their breaking point. And the coach says, like, all right, well, dear, we're gonna go run suicides, or we're gonna go run stairs. And you know what? I read this cool new agility ladder thing that we're gonna start doing. And you know what? Man, oh man, oh man, I read about weightlifting. We should do some of that.
It's a new thing.
Clean and jerk. We're gonna do some of that Olympic lifting.
Superset of a sprint.
Also, I figure we might as well add CrossFit to our training program too, because that's pretty good, right? So we kind of had this thing where we're noticing there's this like additive effect, right? Where coaches are saying like, okay, I have an athlete. They need to be cardiovascularly fit. They need to be strong. They need to be powerful. So instead of kind of using a phasic, a periodized approach, that's more an additive approach. It's like, okay, well, we're going to add this. Now we're going to add this. Now we're going to add this. And we're going to add this. And unfortunately, that comes at the cost of time spent training really, really important things, and or time spent recovering from those really, really important things. So one of the things that we really wanted to convey in the book is that it's perfectly okay to not train everything at the same time. And in fact, there's a lot of good reasons not to do that. It's probably very advantageous not to do that, simply because you cannot generate overloads for everything at the same time. And if you do, you start tipping into that overreaching, non-functional overreaching, overtraining syndrome, which is no good. So really our goal with this book was to kind of introduce people to really what we consider the foundations of periodization, which is how you actually can change volume over time in order to target specific fitness characteristics or specific training goals throughout your annual plan or throughout any given training phase. And I think it really came together really nice. Some of you might have noticed some of the terminology seems kind of like, you might be reading it and be like, this sounds like a no-brainer, duh, of course, right? But unfortunately, we're at a point in exercise and sports science where there really wasn't any terms to describe those things. These are things that we kind of intuitively understood, and if you were to talk to a strength coach or a sports scientist, they know what you mean when you talk about these things, but there was no vocabulary, there was no nomenclature. So one of the goals for the book was also to kind of have a system, a nomenclature that describes these things accurately, so we can talk about it amongst ourselves in an intelligent way. And then, of course, defining those things and how do you actually achieve those things.
Yep. Terminology, a good rigid terminological structure really allows you a lot of eloquence and communication, because you say, well, this is not above your MEV, which is a problem. And if somebody doesn't know what that means, they can look as deeply into the term as they like to understand what it means, versus saying, well, I don't think you're training enough to elicit gains. Well, they could have all sorts of technical problems. Well, what do you mean by gains? What do you mean by training enough? Blah, blah, blah. But if you say MEV, they're like, well, what the hell is that? Well, then you go, well, here's this whole concept, right? And if you read the entire definition of MEV, and for example, in this book, and look up its application, when someone says, if you exceed your MEV and they know the term, there's not really any more debate about what's going on with that. Like, oh, that, right? So it's not, you're able to be very precise, right? You're able, like, it's almost like, let's say like you're, you got interdimensional bad guys show up, and you can say, well, the United States military will show up to handle this. You don't have to ask anymore, like, what does that mean? Like, if you say, well, some military people will show up and be like, well, like what? Like a ragtag group of guys with M16s, or what are we talking about? If you say the United States military, it's kind of implied, but that means potentially the entire thing, which is a whole lot of, firepower. It's just a shorthand for a concept that has a lot of meaning. So when we talk to coaches, it also can impress upon someone that because there is a technical term, there's a lot to know there. So if a coach is like, well, I want to do this, and you say, well, it's going to exceed your MRV, they're going to be like, what's that? And all of a sudden there's a respect there. Like, wait, well, I don't want to do that. What is that? And then you could just shorthand and be like, well, this is the most you can recover from training, and recovering, not recovering is just not going to make you progress. But if you said like, well, they're just not going to recover for progress, they could say something like, well, they just need to work harder, or they just need to work on, getting more sleep and eating more food. But if you introduce the MRV concept, not only is it like kind of demand rigor, but also if they look into it, especially if you're communicating like you should be with people who know the terms, you can be precise now. You can say, okay, this MEV isn't just like you're not training enough. It's a very, very exact definition of something. And once you can use it in language, boy, you save a lot of time. Now that these terms are terms, even though some of them are, I think most of them are pretty obvious, people can just really cut to the chase, and you can tell, for example, a beginner be like, find out what these terms mean, and they do, and they're like, okay, like, all right, you should train between your MEV and your MRV most times. They'll be like, oh wow, that makes a whole lot of sense. versus if you have to describe to them how to train, you'd be like, well, you want to train hard enough to get progress, but not so hard that you overtrain. There's a lot of buts and stuff like that there. But if they go and look up these actual definitions, they'll be like, oh, wow, all the buts have been insert joke about butts here. You know what I mean? Like all the butts have been answered.
And it's kind of nice, like Mike said, it makes it easier for us to communicate it effectively. Those of you who are tuning in through RP Plus, on Tuesday, we had a question regarding why hypertrophy kind of kills the discussion of other fitness gains. And luckily we were able to get right into it. And we said, okay, if you look at MRV for these various different things, boom, and we can describe it really, really quick, really, really easily. Yep. Otherwise, that's a really, really tough discussion to have with somebody if they're not familiar with the limits on things like maximum strength, power, speed, expression, stuff like that. So we wanted to put that into words in a way that was easy to digest, but also significant and meaningful to people who have a very good understanding of these things.
Yep. Perfect. All right, so let's go through the book a little bit, and we'll just kind of say some things. Maybe we'll just look at each chapter really quick, or just tell you what chapter we're looking at, and just tell you guys some stuff that we think you really maybe should pay attention to, or some potential points for confusion, or maybe some stuff we thought was really cool, and then we'll get into the questions right after that. Cool?
Sounds good to me. I got it open.
All right, how much should I train? Ooh, I don't know.
How much you train? Hey, there's me and you.
It's a great picture.
I think I'm out-angling you a little bit.
You are. You look huge.
Nick's out-angling both of us.
Yeah, whatever. I don't know who that is. All right. Where
should we go?
Up, just up to the chapter list. Contents.
There we go.
All right. So, maximum recoverable volume has been beaten to death a lot. It's chapter 1. It should be a review for a lot of you folks, but if it's not, you're going to learn a crap load. It's a super long chapter because maximum recoverable volume was the first concept that James and I really kind of thought through this, because we encountered it in real life so much. If you're a few people, you have to tell them to train enough, especially in collegiate sport, which we're used to. You have to tell them not to train too much, so we're just much more used to that. And the maximum recoverable volume concept kind of really establishes this idea of a volume landmark, being that it was the first. It really was like kind of like, well, here's, it's a very clear volume landmark, like minimum effective volume. It's like kind of a gray area, like how much effect. MRV is, really with performance measurements, it's not very gray area at all. It's a very distinct concept. So once you understand deeply, so we would recommend even those of you who know the concepts to really grind through the first chapter. It'll really get you thinking deeply about volume concepts. And then after that, all of it goes quickly. So chapter 2, minimum effective volume, goes super fast, because that's just, once you learn about maximum recoverable, probably the next thing you'll ask yourself is like, what about there's too little volume? And then we get right into that. For maximum adaptive volume, I wrote my part in there, and then James edited the crap out of it. And that was really a magnum opus on our part for the why you shouldn't, why your MAV is usually the entire MEV to MRV window and not just one part at the left, middle, or right. And we corresponded a lot with Broderick Chavez on that. I kind of bounced ideas off of him because he's been thinking deeply about training for longer than we've been alive, I think.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things where people used to sort of, when I was really short about the idea of MRV in public, people kind of be like, so you just train as hard as you can all the time. And it's like, no, there's a range there. And then, some people, when you introduce the MRV concept and the MEV concept, they'll still be like, well, I don't want minimum effect. I want maximum results. So I just train MRV all the time. And we demonstrate through a variety of ways why that's not a good idea. Conversely, we demonstrate pretty decently about why flirting towards MEV isn't a good idea for most people either. For beginners, it's good, but you gotta push the physiology to extremes every now and again and hit MRV or beyond if you're more advanced, right? Because some people just say, oh, well, why do we even have to go to MRV? You don't if you're a beginner, but eventually it becomes necessary.
A lot of people don't even understand that there's a difference between those two things, right? Where some people assume that like minimum means the least you have to do to get the same effect.
Yeah, I didn't even know what that's like an undefinable term. Remember we went through that early?
Yeah.
Where people are like, what's the minimum volume I have to do to get XYZ effect? And it's like, there may not be a volume you can survive to do that effect.
Yeah.
Like, what's the volume of training I have to do to become Ronnie Coleman? well, there is no volume of training that my body can survive. I don't even have that kind of adaptive proclivity. It's kind of stupid to pick a volume of training to get you what you want to be. Clearly, we all want the best, right?
Well, and then some people are even within that will think like, what is the minimum amount of training I need to get the maximum result? And it's like, well,
that just doesn't make any sense.
Doesn't make any sense.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like it's literally backwards.
So like one of the things that we had to establish too is like there's a dose response, right? Like the more you do generally.
Exactly, up until the point of recovery. And it's like saying, what's the least work I have to do to make the most money? It's like, I'm not so sure that works that way, right? Like the more you work, the better the money is. So personal volume landmarks was a section I had a lot of input on. It's really more of less of a theoretical section and a very practical. Some of the volume landmarks are more laborious. They're also the least important. Maintenance volume is not a super important one, so it takes a while. It takes a couple of macro cycles to find. Minimum effective volume is tough to find. A lot of detection has to occur. MRV you can find in a couple of mesocycles, and it's also probably the most important one to know. Volume landmarks through the dieting phases is really cool. I will say one thing before I actually hand the floor over to James, who will talk about sport training, and I'll talk a little bit about the career stuff. The dieting phases stuff, most people have said that on a massing phase, you can train, your volume requirement is here. On a cutting phase, it's here, and on a maintenance phase, it's in between. What we found actually is a closing and opening of a window about the same average. So it turns out that on a cutting phase, it is very true that you cannot train as much. Your MRV is not as high, but it is also true that if you train too little, your MEV actually rises. Like to outbalance the catabolic processes of a cut, you cannot train at what is normally your maintenance volume. It's no longer maintenance. It's now below maintenance, and you will lose muscle. And counterintuitively, but if you think about it more intuitively, on a mass phase, the whole window opens up. So MRV goes up, and that's pretty obvious. You can train more, but you can benefit from less. When you have a ton of food coming in, when you have all those anabolic activators, even a small amount of training will allow you to grow. So it's one of those things that it really did change. Even as we wrote the book and developed these concepts, it changed my mind on macrocycle or mesocycle design.
Oh yeah.
Where now like a mass phase can be longer or take bigger jumps in intensity than a cutting phase, which either be shorter or take very small jumps in volume and intensity to stay within those narrowed or opened windows. And I think that's a huge revelation of the book that I've never actually seen anyone talk about that in any context ever before.
I think it was completely unique, completely novel. And I think it really came out really cool.
Yep. JMO, you want to chat about training over the career, or what kind of stood out to you as some important points there?
Yeah. So training over the career is really interesting because if you look at a lot of the literature on dose response and training age, there's a very, very clear relationship. And one of the things that really stood out to me is the amount of training you need as a beginner or as a novice, whatever you want to call it, is like so minimal to get this huge, massive effect of either growth or strength, whatever you want. Either one's good. And then we kind of see this like lengthening effect over time. So like the minimum amount you have to do can start to go up, but the maximum amount you can do goes up. But then at some point, it actually comes back down and flips right when we actually get to the late stages of our athletic development, master's development, where the actual minimum effective might be above what you can actually do, right? And that's when things like anabolic drugs become more appealing for people.
To expand the windows again. Yep. So the windows start to contract, the MEV to MRV windows as you go through the career, which is another thing like, this is one of the theoretical backbones to the idea that beginner and advanced programs have to be different.
Oh, it's
like a beginner, when people say, what do you think about linear? Or people say things like, linear progression worked for me for the first 2 years, but then DUP worked better after. It's like, yeah, you can do a ton of linear progression when you have huge adaptive windows. But if you have a really tiny adaptive window, you might have to hit it and really back off, hit it and really back off, hit it and really back off, because if you you quickly just exit your MEV MRV window.
Yeah. And a lot of times people, I don't know why that gives credence to programs. It's like that really all you're demonstrating is the dose response relationship, which is what we were trying to describe in this book. It doesn't mean that DUP is better than linear or this or that. It means like they serve different purposes at different timelines based on your training age.
Totally.
So I really like that chapter. I actually want to backtrack a little bit. Maintenance volume is probably the least glorious of the chapters that we talked about, but it kind of serves as the backbone for everything that comes later,
especially chapter 8.
And so one of the things that was really important for me when we were talking about chapter 8 is establishing this idea of maintenance volume, because when you work in sport, obviously calculating MRV can get really complicated really quick. Now, if you just do like physique training, your MRV mostly consists of how much weight training you do, and then any cardio stuff, if applicable. For powerlifting, right, it's pretty straightforward, mostly your strength stuff, and then if you're doing any accessory work with that, pretty easy. But what about when you get into the harder stuff, like doing field sports, basketball, something like that? That's when we have to start thinking like, okay, well, I can only train so much. I have all these different components that I'm balancing, and as sports science, one of the things that we like is that none of those things have universal units, right? So you have like volume loads in the weight room, you have minutes spent playing basketball, you have number of free throws. So it's kind of hard to think about like, how do I start categorizing those things, and how can I like start actually numerically saying what is the limit, right? And so one of the things that comes from that is saying, okay, well, I can't do all these things at once. I have to back off of certain things, right? So if I want to get better at playing basketball, I know I have to practice free throws, but at some point I actually have to start playing live basketball and doing my offensive and defensive techniques and stuff like that. Does that mean I abandon doing my free throw shooting? No, that means I just need to keep a maintenance level, right? I need to not get worse at free throw shooting at some point.
But the thing is that the idea that maintenance volumes are much lower than volumes required to progress, especially in high-level athletes, is only intuitive after you speak to high-level athletes, and even sometimes they don't realize it unless it's pointed out.
Yeah.
So, and this kind of interacts with obsessiveness with athletes and coaches of always trying to push all boundaries. So one of the reasons it's important, especially from a periodization perspective, is saying, look, if you're super high level, your MRV is going to limit how much training you can do because your training is so disruptive and takes so much out of you. Okay, granted. Now you got like 3 things you got to get good at. Let's say running, shooting and passing, just as an example. If you can only work on 2 of them at the same time above maintenance volume, like above minimum effective volume, because anything below that just maintains them, then how is it that you're going to conserve the other one? Right? So let's say shooting and running is what you're working on and passing you're not. Well, shooting and running, you can work on plenty and get better at, but if you stop passing altogether, you're going to get worse at passing, and nobody wants to do that. So the usual recourse has been to do an even amount of all of those things. The problem is that idea, and I'm sure you guys have read it if you've read the book already, the no man's land in advanced athletes between maintenance volume and minimum effective volume. And actually talked to some of you guys know Alex Viada about this. And Alex Viada, as you guys know, is super, super high-level expert at balancing weight training and endurance training at the same time. And, him and I had a really good conversation about, like, Alex, what does it take for an advanced endurance athlete to make gains? And he's like, heaven and earth, right? You got to move heaven and earth. And then what does it take for that athlete to conserve their endurance ability or their strength? He's like, 2 hours of training a week or 4 hours or something like,
not much.
Very, very little. So then the next question is, so what happens between those 2 points? The answer is you accumulate more fatigue, you spend more time for pretty much almost nothing, right? It's like
probably a net negative at that point, right?
Totally.
That training is now interfering with whatever else you were doing.
Totally. So, the answer of let's shoot for the middle of all of those, basically, like even thirds for, let's say, passing, shooting, and running, then we end up actually in that no man's land for all of them. And then we have the idea that we're training, everything's above maintenance volume, but the level of improvement is either infinitesimally small or non-existent. That's a big deal. That's a really big problem. So then how do we solve that problem? Where we understand we have to find the maintenance volume for all those things, and that's a very low number. Now we have the ability to squeeze in a maintenance volume for one of them, let's say shooting, and then passing and running, we can actually work from MEV to MRV, productively improve them a couple months later, flip the priorities, and grow the other abilities. And that's where phase potentiation in chapter 8, which mostly Dr. Hoffman wrote, come in. It's a huge, huge deal, but you have to understand maintenance volume. You have to understand the implication of that gap between maintenance volume and minimum effective volume. A lot of people get caught in that gap, mostly because of an addiction to trying to push everything all at the same time. Advanced athletes are fine. You try to push everything at the same time, one of 2 things happen. Either you're mindful of your MRV and nothing improves, or you're not mindful of your MRV and you overreach.
Yeah.
It's really nasty.
So what I would want you guys to get from chapter 8 is to think creatively about, can I actually find ways of hitting my maintenance volume by just doing what I'm already doing, right? So I think one of the take-home points I was trying to make, and a lot of it is like, okay, so once you move into like your scrimmaging, your actual live gameplay practice, things like that, right? You're actually hitting MVs for fitness, and some skill-related things, and certainly from some tactical things, right? So you might say like, okay, well, I need to keep working on my speed development. I need to keep working on my cardio. I need to keep working on my technique. But it turns out like you actually get that just from going and showing up to rugby practice, to basketball practice.
And doing gameplay.
And doing gameplay. You're hitting those maintenance volumes, so you don't need to fill up your MRV with a bunch of fluff and being in that gray zone, because just by showing up and hitting the court, you're already doing all that stuff. You're doing it for fitness, you're doing it for tactics, you're doing it for your skills. So it's one of those things that's kind of hard to think about when you're like, well, I need to keep getting better at all these things, but really you're already showing up. You might even be hitting MEVs for some of those things.
Yep. All right, let's take a look at some questions.
Sure.
YouTube Live. First time with this. All right, let's go all the way to the top, I guess, right?
To the top, to the top.
All right, so let's see. Patrick Dion says, finished book and loved it for hypertrophy training. How would you go about emphasis? I train some at MRV and the rest at MV, MEV, or at low end of MEV. Thanks. So here are my views on the hypertrophy stuff, and I'll let James answer more of the sport performance stuff. It really just, and this is something we didn't get into the book because it's, we can't answer all the questions in the book. We alluded to it. Oh, well, actually, I take that back. We kind of had a graphical representation of that. One of them was for hypertrophy and the other was for sport training.
Yep.
When you're a beginner, you can stack all of your body parts together and they're under total body MRV. When you're more advanced or when you're like intermediate, my rule of thumb is like 2/3 you can train from MEV to MRV, and then 1/3 of your body you might have to put at either MEV only or around MEV or at maintenance volume. As you get more advanced, the maintenance volume expands and the MEV expands, and the MEV to MRV window, the priority stuff gets lower. I think for truly highly advanced powerlifters and bodybuilders and stuff like that, they can really only push maybe 1/3 of their physiology hard at any one time. Everything else has to be some combination of being held at minimum progress, MEV, or no progress at all, which is maintenance wise. So for example, when you see a powerlifter who's only totaling, let's say 2,000 raw, when they say they want to bring up their bench, most times that means they're taking their squat and deadlift and really either going for minimum gains or just maintenance. Yep. And they really push their bench because they really, very few people are like, I'm just going to get better and push everything harder. Like, well, shouldn't you already have been pushing everything harder? How does that change? So I think it really does, Patrick, depend on your level of advancement.
Yeah. And then so I think for hypertrophy, let's just assume, he said hypertrophy, right? So let's just assume he's doing like physique stuff. You can go about that a number of different ways. The most obvious is to ramp up the volume on things that you're emphasizing and ramp down some others down to like MVs or MEVs, or like what we have talked about in RP Plus, because we've had this question rephrased a number of different times. You can also choose exercises that are inherently less brutal, like not doing conventional deadlifts, maybe not doing underhand pull-ups if you're doing a biceps, or however many ways you. So there's a couple different ways you can do that. The most obvious is like, okay, I'm going to pump up this, decrease that, or you can just choose things that expand your MRV window through less fatiguing choices, like not doing low bar squats or deadlifts.
And a big thing to add there is, remember, it comes down to your own personal values, not general recommendations. Start with our general recommendations. Start on the low end of priorities. Don't prioritize a ton of stuff. Start half and half. Prioritize half, MEV to MRV. The other half somewhere, either MV or MEV. Run a mesocycle. If you feel like even at the top of the mesocycle, the body parts that you're de-emphasizing felt pretty undertrained, and whole body you felt pretty recovered, like let's say you only push legs hard and chest hard and you go hit it all out and back is really on the back burner and arms, you finish the mesocycle and you're like, I didn't even come close to total body, like my legs were fried, my chest was fried, but like I felt like my back could go for miles, and I just felt like I'm recovered. Well, shit, add back in next time. Yeah. You might still be able to add most, it happens like this. At the beginning of your career, you'd be able to train everything MEV to MRV. Then you might like lose a body part out of like the 6 major ones, right? Then you'll lose 2 body parts. You'll have to switch to MEV, MV. It's not like as soon as you turn intermediate, you lose 1/3 of your body parts there right away.
Right. I see what you're
So
saying. Yep.
make sure to keep that in mind. Push it as hard as you can, and just be realistic when you finish a cycle and you're like, well, I tried to train legs, chest, and back all at the same time, and I fucked all those up. So that was dumb. Next time you're going to pull one out.
Yeah. All right. The Tins 18. Hi from Croatia. What is your opinion? The best split to implement this way of training?
I'll take that one really quick.
Yeah.
Go to my Facebook, Mike Israetel. It's a public account. Search Israetel on Facebook. Israetel myth training split. The idea that there's an optimal training split is a myth.
Girl.
So look that up, and it's a huge post, and it's going to tell you everything you need to know about that subject.
All right. So Zach says, thanks for putting this on, you guys. Been looking forward to it. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for purchasing the book.
Sweet.
Try Guys GI. Thanks for getting this book together on a very challenging and confusing topic. Yeah, man, that's what we're here for.
That's why we got the book together, because we were confused.
We were challenged. We were like, what the hell is going on with this shit? All right, Lance Silva, this book is awesome. I have a question. Is it necessary to do a RP test for all the exercises in a mesocycle to find my MR? I think he meant MRV.
Yeah.
Oh, did he mean a PR test?
I think like a rep max test,
Rep
maybe.
test? Yeah, so I would say no, because what ends up happening is you might do like a rep max test on one thing that wipes you out from everything else. So really what we would say is do what you normally do. Start with kind of what your normal baseline training is, hitting all the major muscle groups however frequently that you see fit, and push the sets a little bit week to week up until the end of your mesocycle. So if you're on a 4 weeks, so that means week 1 you're doing something, week 2 you add a little bit, week 3 you add a little bit, week 4 you add a little bit, deload and evaluate how that went, right? If you felt like you were a little beat up but still had a little more gas in the tank, it really wasn't fatiguing you all that much, it wasn't kind of carrying over into other parts of your life, start with maybe a slightly higher baseline and repeat that process until you kind of find that point where you're like, man, I am fucked.
Or just in addition to the quantitative factor, you just have to know. So like maybe you're stopping 3 or 4 short of failure on the first microcycle, and you did 225 for like sets of 8 on average. You do 230 on the second micro, 235, and then 240 on the last one. If you hit 240 for like sets of 6 to 8, that converts on the rep max formula. If you're going really close to failure, it's the similar ability of performance. Like if you looked at 2 guys in the gym, think of it this way. One guy was benching 240 for sets of 6, hard, and the other guy was benching 225 for sets of 8, pretty hard. You'd be like, which one's stronger? Someone says. You'd be like, man, they're just about the same. The thing is, you've exceeded your MRV last week when this week you come in and you hit 240. You got 225 for easy 8s, 240, you hit for like 4, 3, 1, 1, and then some guy has to drag it off of you. You have not recovered.
No.
For some reason or another, you couldn't recover. Is it because the volume was too high last week? Maybe, but that's why you have to rerun a couple of mesocycles. So one of the first body parts I ever found my MRV for was back. And it was around 20 sets per body part at the time that I found it many years ago. It's lower now because I'm stronger. So how did I find it? I just kept approaching. I kept tracking my training. And this is before I even like understood the formal concept of MRV. I kept approaching 20 sets. And like some mesocycles, like it was like 4 mesos. On a good mesocycle, I'd hit 22 and then shit the bed. But some of them I'd hit 18 and shit the bed.
Right.
And then it looked like every time I got close to 20, it just was by no means clear that I would be able to sustain my, it was like pull-ups. I would do pull-ups with 25 pounds hanging for like sets of 8 on average. And then after the week of like 20 sets per week, I would do 30 pounds hanging, and it would be like 5, 3, 2, 1, 1. And everything was like super tight. And I was like, what the hell is happening to me? Well, every time I hit about 20 sets for back, that was about my MRV. And if I tried to push beyond that, performance would start to drop off. So it's not that you're objectively lifting less weight for less reps and sets. It's compared to your normal levels of performance. Are you able to recover? Maximum recoverable volume. That's exactly how it works.
And that's also, I think sometimes people get confused too, where they're like, they do like a very linear increase in intensity, and they go, well, I was benching 225 for 8, but when I got to 265, I couldn't do 8s anymore.
Right.
right? But it's like, well, you couldn't have done 265 for 8 anyway.
For sure. You're just not that strong.
Right.
So it's got to convert on the formula. And it doesn't matter what formula you use. The Brzezinski formula is fine. You don't even have to use a formula. Just use your real world knowledge. Like if you bench 225 for a max set of 10, do you really expect to bench 250 for a set of 10? No.
Yeah.
But can you bench 250 for 6? Maybe. And if you went and did a cycle and then you did 250 for 1 at the end and it was hard, you probably surpassed your MRV.
Right. That's the difference. Okay. Did we get Lance? I think so.
We did. Andres or Orko.
Orko.
Great book. Would you recommend against working to your MRV in a mesocycle for multiple muscle groups, or should you focus on just one muscle group? I think we got that question already with the previous answer.
And just keep in mind too, like a lot of the time you're not really just thinking about one muscle group in particular, because it's very rare that you're only training one muscle group to like the MRV and doing maintenance for everything else, right? You're really thinking about like system-wide MRV, right? So you can imagine like how much biceps could I do if I took out legs all together? Well, probably a fuckload, but I'm never going to do that. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So it doesn't make
Yep. By the way, I just like to say something. There's recommended videos for shit you usually watch. Top
cats.
Kittens meet puppies for the first time, not to laugh. Second one is talking Siamese cat, very talkative. She answers all of my questions. Crap, James.
No,
you need to get out more. All right. Let's see.
Hey, that one's in like Russian or something.
Oh my God.
We'll get to that one.
Anatoly Stepanov, and there's a blue arrow blocking Stepanovich, maybe Stepanov. Okay.
For those of you guys who aren't in RP Plus, if you have a silly name, you're a fair game. We apologize ahead of time.
Yeah. All right. Gursavak Singh says, how can you take into account for MRV for a single session if you're doing full body routine but want to put emphasis on certain muscles but do not want to interfere with MRV of that session? Really? So it's actually so you're talking about intra-session, not even session-to-session MRV, and that's like it really just comes down to this. You are used to a certain level of performance, let's say in bicep curls. Like you calculated that you're going to be curling 65 pounds for 3 sets of 8. That's well within what you normally do, but stimulative. And let's say you also had the idea to do 50 sets of barbell rows before that over your MRV for intra-session MRV. So the question is, if you do the 50 sets of barbell rows, can you hit curls like you planned on right after? If the answer is no, then you're really well fucked and you're over your MRV. Right. So if you still want to be stimulative to biceps, you have to make sure that the number of sets on your bent rows isn't excessively high. And you will find that maybe if you do 5 or less sets of rows, you still can recover enough between exercises to do biceps the justice they deserve. James, what are some examples of exercises that tend to really tax intra-session? The one thing I think of is if you do deadlift before squats, it exceeds your intra-session back MRV, and then you literally just can't squat adequately after that. It's just not going to happen.
For me, like triceps and like incline pressing, that crushes me.
That's it. So if you do tricep work before incline pressing, you just like your chest is like anytime.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're like, oh, sorry, chest, really? Yeah. Especially with dumbbells where the chest can't help. Like, as the chest does this, the triceps still have to work just as hard to extend. In a barbell, it's a closed system, so your chest can take over. In dumbbells, if you do too many triceps, your chest simply won't be given the opportunity to activate because that's it. Yep.
Deadlift, I think, is the most notorious.
Yep.
Like, it just crushes.
And that's kind of one of those, way back in the day, reference here, Dave Tate, I believe, from Elite FTS, was quoted once as being like, honestly, this is for powerlifting, mind you, not for bodybuilding. He goes, here's the deal, guys. My experience over like these many years, you can really only do 2 hard movements per session. Like if, he wasn't speaking at a super technical level, but like, he even said 2 overloading movements. And that's exactly what he meant. He's like, after that, either your shit wasn't hard or you're pretending.
Right.
And I remember hearing that in like 2004 or something, 2006, and it stuck with me. And boy, in powerlifting, is it true. Like you hit up deadlifts and then you can hit up hard bench whatever the fuck you do after that is light.
Nothing.
It's
Nothing.
maintenance volume at that point, because some people are like, okay, you look at a program of beginner, right? And they're like, I'm going to deadlift for reps, bent row for reps, pull up for reps, then squat for reps, and then finish with a leg press drop set. You're going to die halfway through that program. And if you don't die, the amount of weight you have to take off the bar, especially if you're training for strength, is just a waste of your time. So it's one of those things like that exceeds intra-session MRV.
Yeah, and so like kind of going back to the original question. So let's just say okay, so we're doing a full body split. So maybe you're doing 3 days per week full body, right? An example of what you can do there is have the first movement in whatever you're doing is the overload movement, right? Where you're really pushing the volume, you're doing it hard. The subsequent movement, you might be down towards MEV, right? Or maybe somewhere a little bit above. And then that last movement might even be at maintenance volumes or even very close to MEV.
Especially for strength, because you can't just make up more reps of volume. It's got to be certain heavier. It just doesn't do anything.
Yeah, so there's kind of a spectrum there. So one is like definitely overloading. One is probably at MEV, and then one's probably closer to like a light session.
Yep. So easy example for powerlifting program design. If you train Monday, Wednesday, Friday, it's totally cool to do all 3 lifts, all 3 days. Monday, you're going to do squats first, really hard, bench a second, pretty hard, deadlifts last, technique only.
Easy.
Wednesday, you do deadlifts really hard, squats, meh, bench super light. And then Friday, bench really hard, squat, meh, and then deadlift decent amount, but nothing too crazy. So something like that.
Exactly what I was getting at. Very good. All right, you take. There's no way I can read that.
All right. Well, it's just his name. Luckily, the rest isn't. It'd be sweet if it was written in Russian. It would take me an hour to read. But all right. Anatoly Stepanov says, from hypertrophy standpoint, can we alter either number of reps per set, number of sets, proximity to failure? So what do you think the best adjustments to be made on every mesocycle stage? I think I prefer adjusting most of those. I like adjusting proximity to failure, so going from farther from failure to closer as the mesocycle progresses, as the accumulation phase goes. We like to add sets. Number of reps is tricky because sometimes that can take you out of physiologically relevant zones. So for example, if you're training for strength, if you add reps at some point, you're not really training for strength anymore, you're training for hypertrophy. You should have added weight instead. And because adding weight is such a powerful mediator for all forms of advancement, as you're adding weight and proximity to failure, that kind of rules out adding reps, because you're probably just going to get the same reps, if not slightly lower.
Exactly.
So I would say adding sets, proximity to failure, and weight is a really good idea. Adding reps can be done under special circumstances, but I would normally not recommend that.
So I think too, what he's saying is made on every mesocycle. So what Mike was describing was stuff that you would do within the mesocycle, and then reps is something you would change across mesocycles, right, for hypertrophy. So you might be doing, just as a simple example, 8 to 12 on one, and then when you transition to the next mesocycle, you might be doing like 12 to 20 or something like that.
Perfect. All right, let's see if I can scroll like a fucking human being here. Oh, hold on, I can touch the screen, right? Oh, sweet. Jim Ammer.
I used to go by Jim.
No, you didn't.
Coach Jim. Actually, Coach Tim would sign up his name. We had a sign up list when we did testing at our lab when we were PhD students. You had to like sign your name up on the board. Coach Tim would write Tim, and then he would back out and be like Jim.
Oh my God!
And Doc would be like, "Where's Jim?"
Yeah, I gotta go by Jim. Damn it! Well, we've many of us have been thrown under the bus there. All right. So Jim Ammer says, how do adaptive windows due to caloric intakes alter your previous writings or templates of strength hypertrophy, or do they? Well, they probably alter a lot of my previous writings, but they don't alter the templates because the templates auto-regulate. That's the beautiful thing, right? So like if you're in a cut, the template just probably won't really increase. You just won't rate things as highly because remember, your cut fatigues you. So at week 2, normally you'd be +1ing everything and adding volume, but now you're like, oh, how it beat me up quite a bit. And then you wouldn't +1 anything and you wouldn't add volume, and then that's it. And then it would auto-regulate. So I think it helps most of that problem.
And a lot of the info from the book can tell you how to modify the template. So let's say you got the male physique templates, right? And instead of starting at a base of 2 on your cut, you might know like, okay, I might actually start at a base of 3, but I won't work up to a max of 6 like I usually do. I might start at 3 and only work up to 5.
And that's per exercise.
Right. And that's just from the information you got from the book, right? So you can modify the template based on what you learned from that. After that, it's just auto-regulation.
James, this one's for you. Try Guy GI. Well, that's cool. So I'm a triathlete and also a CrossFitter. Holy
Damn,
crap,
son.
you like exercise. Any recommendations to help with programming? Focus more on triathlon endurance sport.
Yeah, so the same ideas apply here, right? So there might be times throughout the year where you're really, really focusing on your triathlon stuff, right? Now, for triathlon, what do you have to be good at? Well, you got to be able to swim, you got to be able to ride, and you got to be able to run, which take up the majority of the time in the triathlon. Well, almost exclusively the bike is the longest event, followed by the run, followed by the swim, right? So you can have a priority system in place there. But really what you're going to be thinking about is, all right, there are times throughout the year where I might be training for CrossFit. I have to at least be hitting my maintenance volumes on those three things, right? You can take that same idea and flip-flop it. You say, okay, when I'm training for triathlon, I don't want to suck at like wall balls or any of my CrossFit specific skills like the gymnastics, muscle ups, stuff like that. I have to hit some level of maintenance volumes for those things. And a lot of it's actually just technique. Like technique maintenance is pitifully low.
Yep.
Right.
Here's a little bit that's exactly correct. On the practical end, here's an example. Find out your wattage for time trials on the bike, your mile time, for example, or something similar, 5K time for the run, and some equivalent measure of performance for the swim. Get about 95% of those numbers and do that as your, or 90% or something, and do that as you're still in shape for triathlon, generally, without specifically training it, cutoff. That is going to be your MV, your maintenance volume reference frame. Then experiment with how little of that training during your CrossFit prep season you could do in order to still not get worse, right? So let's say maybe every week, because you'll be doing the training anyway, every 2 weeks of that, try one of the time trials. And let's say you have 80% CrossFit training and only 20% training for triathlon. Every couple of weeks, measure your performance. Do a time trial in either swim, bike, or run, or all three. Maybe spread them up over the week. Are you still hitting within 95% of your best abilities, or your expected abilities?
I would say expected, maybe not personal best,
which is why I said 95, right? Basically, are you hitting around what still means you're in pretty good shape? 2 weeks later, test it again. 2 weeks later, test it. If it starts falling off consistently, your maintenance volume estimate is wrong. You need to do more on training and less CrossFit training. But if it's right on the money, try to train CrossFit a little bit more and see when it starts to fall off. Then bring that back up again so you can get a good balance, so that you know for future reference how much CrossFit you can really get away with training during CrossFit times, and how much triathlon you need to train. On the other hand, find out a decent level of in CrossFit shape that you're willing to be at, and no less, because it's going to interfere with long-term prep, and save that for your triathlon season. Notice, to reflect Dr. Hoffman's stuff, we're talking about seasons here. You got to pick competitions and train for them. You can't just train for everything all at the same time at the same rate. So when you're busy training for triathlon, maybe 80% of your training can be triathlon stuff, maybe 20% is going to be CrossFit. And every now and again, test yourself in CrossFit. How many pull-ups can you do? How many burpees for time? How many kettlebell cleans or something? Whatever metrics you have, talk to your CrossFit coach. And if you are declining, it's not enough. You got to do more. If you are stable, try to do a little less CrossFit training to see how little you can do and still improve your triathlon, and still be able to have your CrossFit performance and have more ability to improve triathlon.
Yeah, I think that model is really easy to work with too, because the nice thing is the strength training will kind of carry over nicely to both, because it'll help your running, it'll help your power output on your bike, and it will certainly help all your CrossFit stuff. So if it was me and I was doing that, which I am, there's no way in hell I could do that. But if I were, or if I was programming for somebody, I would know that, okay, my strength training is going to be fairly consistent across these two things, maybe with some specific stuff for CrossFit, specific stuff for the bike every now and again. But after that, really what I'm going to do then is think about, what am I doing extra, right? So I have my strength training component, then I kind of have my extras component, right? My extras when I'm in season for racing is going to be primarily my triathlon stuff. And I'm going to make sure that I'm hitting MEVs up through MAVs for those things when I'm in season for triathlon. And then for my CrossFit stuff, I'm just going to put those on the back burner and just hit MVs. And the nice thing is the strength training, like, you don't have to modify a whole lot, right? And then when you're in CrossFit season, when you're trying to have either like gym meets or you're trying to do any of the various competitions, you're going to put some of the other stuff back down to maintenance volumes. Like, you're going to take a run, and you might even do some of that stuff already for CrossFit, right? If you're already doing like bike stuff in CrossFit, you might not have to do a whole lot of bike stuff. If you're already running for CrossFit, you might not have to do a whole lot of running, but you might just do one of those things per week just as maintenance volumes, and then really ramp up the CrossFit stuff. So you'll kind of see like wax and wane, wax and wane, wax and wane. Really, really easy model. And then, like I said, the strength training is kind of consistent, so you don't have to change that a whole lot throughout the year.
Yeah,
I think it's very manageable.
I'll also recommend for your CrossFit training when you're in your season for triathlon, make sure the movements you're picking to train for CrossFit are the most fundamental to the sport, the most whole body, and the most general. For example, clean and press for reps. What's that called? Ring pull-ups or ring pull-up to dip comp. What's it called?
Muscle up.
Yeah. Muscle up. That kind of stuff. It keeps you technical in the CrossFit movements generally, and like pick another gymnastics move, right? The clean and press keeps you technical and catching and carrying over the bar, and it's high volume. It hits most of your body. The muscle ups will hit the rest of your body that doesn't hit, and pick something else that's pretty hardcore lifting for reps related, because remember, what you don't want to do is be like CrossFit. Okay, the CrossFit WOD today, even though I'm prioritizing my endurance stuff, the CrossFit WOD today that I just chose to come in and work with the group involves a shitload of endurance rowing. Your endurance is going to be amazing anyway. The rowing specific part is something that within a couple of weeks you can get up to in PR. You probably shouldn't be doing a lot of CrossFit endurance stuff when you're already training so much endurance. Your CrossFit workouts should be customized to you and be much more strength, power, and explosiveness oriented than everyone else's CrossFit workouts, which are going to have a broader spectrum because you're taking care of your endurance everywhere else.
And I would actually make a case that says, like, if you're in season for your triathlon training, 2 WODs per week probably has enough variation in there to hit maintenance volumes for most of that stuff that you need, I would say. Like,
totally.
So the difference here is, like we're saying, don't go to that hour-long Metcon while you're in season for triathlon training.
You do not need metabolic conditioning in triathlon training.
You can just do like 2 WODs per week, and you're probably hitting MVs for what you need.
All right, let's see. The Tins 18. Do we already answer a question by him or no?
I think we did.
Okay, let's get to some new folks. Sorry, Tins 18. All right, Dylan Herbert says, let's say I'm going to run the RP powerlifting hypertrophy block, and I'd like to find my MEV for each movement. Would you all focus on one movement at a time while keeping the other 2 at lower volumes?
Not necessarily, because you're going to be training all 3 at the same time. Maybe not to the same magnitude, but you're going to be training all 3 at the same time, at least for a little while.
Yeah.
So you can run them all at the same.
I think finding MEVs for movements is just going to take like months and years.
Yeah.
Finding them for body parts and movement categories is a much better idea. Pushing MEV, pulling MEV, squatting MEV / legs MEV, but per movement itself is going to be tough unless you only train the pure power lifts, because you could find your MEV for bench and then realize that your program has bench and shoulder press in it. So then the shoulder press is going to exceed that. So then you're close to MRV for your push cut. So what the hell are we going? So you have to adjust all that stuff. So we would say for movement classes is better, because then you can say, okay, I've got 20 sets of pressing volume per week, 18 sets of squatting, and 10 sets of deadlifts is my MRVs, let's say. In your MEVs, you also find. Then you can start to put in various movements and still know you're going to hit a rough estimate. Because remember, due to exercise variation, you're not going to want to just restrict yourself to each exercise.
Right.
Yeah. Zach Peters says, any experience with athletes diagnosed with depression? If so, could you discuss any noteworthy recovery-related idiosyncrasies associated with training that population?
We are not qualified.
Not qualified, and
it's
a great question about a topic that this book doesn't remotely cover, unfortunately, because we're not qualified to cover it.
Yeah,
but we wish you your best. I would say that if you are following, here he is, Zach Peters. Go follow Ian McCarthy on Facebook. He talks about that kind of stuff all the time and very intelligently. So I think that's probably a good idea. All right. Emmanuel MJ Enriquez says, what are your thoughts about the new fad of power building? Most of us definitely want.
That's not new.
It's not new. We've seen that in the 90s. Most of us definitely want to get our landmarks of our desired numbers on the deadlift, squat, and bench. What are your thoughts? I think my thoughts is that it should occur phasically. You do a mesocycle where you conserve your lifting performance but focus on physique, or 2 or 3 mesocycles. Then you go to 2 or 3 mesocycles of conserving your physique but focusing on strength and not trying to train them all at the same time.
totally agree. And I think that style is totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not like pure bodybuilding. It's not pure powerlifting. It's for people who want to look good and feel strong. That's totally fine. You just can't do them both at the same time. And like when you go from hypertrophy to strength, you just have to be aware that those MEVs, those MRVs are going to change a little bit, especially like if you're focusing more on the power lifts versus like dumbbell stuff, but that's fine. People better. Bruce Banner.
Oh yeah. So Bruce Banner says,
wait a minute.
I mean, isn't a scientist.
Yeah.
What are they doing in sports? Assuming proper hydration, is cramping a sign of overreaching, not being recovered? James knows much more about it, so I'll embarrass myself first and let you clean this up. It is a potential sign of overreaching, not being recovered, but it is not dependable enough because it could be a sign of about 50 other things. If it occurs in concert with all of the other or a majority of signs of overreaching, it's definitely kind of like a period on the sentence of you're definitely fucked. But if none of the other stuff is there and you're just cramping, or it's cramping and you're just tired, but you're still hitting your performance variables, it's by no means clear that it's related to overreaching, overtraining.
Yeah, you nailed it. The only thing yeah, you nailed it. It's just inconsistent. There's 100 things that can cause cramping. I had a guy on I had a guy on our rugby team at ETSU. His calves would just cramp every game. He would be like debilitatingly bad calf cramps for no reason. So I mean, like obviously there is a reason, but it just some people are just prone to cramping. Yeah. It can be dehydration. It can be overreaching. It can be electrolyte. It can be all sorts of different. It can be physical contact injury. It can be all sorts of stuff.
Cramping in the literature, last I checked, is also incredibly mysterious. They're not really 100% sure what causes it exactly at the molecular level. They have some ideas and some examples, but then cramping occurs under circumstances in which those examples aren't likely, and they're left baffled. So it's one of those things like, how do you treat, a lot of people are like, I get a lot of cramps. How do I treat it? After they get through like hydration and warming up, not going to failure and fatigue, you're like, oh, I'm still cramping. What do I do? Most physiologists are like,
I've had good luck with like on the spot, like Johnny on the spot, when you had an athlete and they're cramping up like in a game, like not just in the gym. Pressure seems to help a lot. Like if you put a big pressure on the
neck,
or even just on the area, like if it's their leg or their calf, just like really dig in, really small point, just put it in there, and that seems to cause a relaxation effect, like that stimulates like the GTOs.
I just thought we were gonna choke them out and be like, shh.
No, it's just like I think it just like down regulates the reflex response, basically.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, that seems to work at least when you're in a pinch where you just like, I just need this guy to get back to playing rugby.
Yep. Nathan Reynolds says, "Go blue, indeed." Whee. At what points does spreading volume out over the week become suboptimal or even detrimental? 20 sets of back once a week, 10 sets of back twice a week, 4 sets of back 5 times a week. Nathan, I would say that from a hypertrophy perspective, anything that's not everyday training, I think, is okay. It's balancing the SRA curves that's a problem. And also some things are they have so much damage and they elicit so much fatigue, you just won't be able to overload them all of that time. So for example, if you train your quads, for most people twice a week, you can train them pretty hard twice a week. If you train them 4 times a week, all of the sessions are so easy because you have to wait till the next session and be recovered. You might actually not be able to really bust the quads up in any of the sessions, and it becomes just kind of an exercise in conserving your abilities.
Yeah, so I think the bigger factor here is, like Mike said, SRA, which is primarily determined by your training age and kind of how strong you are. Mm-hmm. So, it's one of those things like you can get away with training more frequently, especially when you're a novice lifter or you're just not that strong. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing to be ashamed of. If you're not super strong, you might be able to do back 4 times a week. But as you get more trained and as you develop strength over time, you will probably start having to back that down to 3, maybe even 2 times per week. Like Mike here can only train back, twice or 1.5?
1.5.
Yeah, that's normal, right? Like I can train my biceps 4 times per week.
Same here.
And that goes down if I'm doing kickboxing, but I have weak ass arms, little punk ass arms.
Oh, bitch ass arms. You ain't shit. I just have to point that out. All right.
For the record.
Yeah. All right. MB says, can we use the male physique templates for different muscle group emphasis without low volume blocks? Just switch the emphasis to another muscle group so that the previously emphasized muscle group gets resensitized. You can do that for a while. Eventually, psychologically, if nothing else, you're going to get tired of always pushing something. And for no other reason than psychological, everything is going to have to go to low volume back. Because remember, there's two kinds of fatigue accumulation. If you read our, well, so first of all, a book we'll be releasing early next year on recovery is going to beat this to death. But a lot of detail in the Scientific Principles of Training book about different kinds of fatigue. There's local fatigue and systemic fatigue. The local fatigue will be fine, but the systemic fatigue is what low volume phases really bring down. So for example, if you do squats or legs and then chest, then you do back and then glutes, the next mesocycle, it doesn't matter what you pick, you're going to be done training hard. You're going to start a mesocycle, and it doesn't matter how easy it is, unless it's maintenance volume, you're going to break halfway through it. Because systemically, you've accumulated, your cortisol levels are high, your testosterone levels are low, cytokine levels are through the roof, a bunch of other stuff, and basically you took your whole body to the limit, and there's no you can't push it on anything. For example, let's say that you're a super high profile surgeon, right? And you have like an 18-hour brain surgery and you save the dude and everyone claps and cheers. You go home. Let's say you're not ready to sleep yet. Are you going to log on and play super competitive video games? No, because you're done. Yes, that's right. The new Wraith game is out.
Oh, yeah.
What is that called?
The Shadow of War.
Shadow of, oh my fucking God. I used to watch James play that for hours on end. Holy shit. It's a violent ass game.
Really violent,
get that game for a 4-year-old. So, if you're, in that situation, playing, a violent video game that's super competitive and you're super into, isn't surgery at all. So it's very much variation. It may not even use very similar parts of your brain, but the concept of being on, of being competitive, of pushing is something you're overreached on completely in general. So when you go home, you might just want to sit in front of the TV and watch Stranger Things until your mouth falls off.
I got to catch up. I only got one
pretty fucking strange
one episode in the new season.
I keep thinking about what if Vegeta was in there, but then just like everything else, the series would end in 10 minutes.
You're like, this isn't that strange. I don't see what all the fuss is about.
Die. Hawkins just blows up. Well, you killed everyone, so I guess we won.
Anyways, where's Kakarot?
Kakarot. All right. Matthias Kuninen, I will assume from Finland, because that's Finnish people have names like that. Just want to say thanks for all the content you've put out to RP Juggernaut and your personal accounts. You've literally changed how I look at my training and performance. Thanks, guys.
Right on,
by the way, Dr. Mike, you're not that cool. James Hoffman is sweet.
Like,
really, Matthias?
I appreciate him, but like, no one follows my personal account because it's just got dumb shit. I'm like, check out this heavy metal album I like. Hey, do you guys like Cats? And everyone's like, no.
Everybody loves Cats. I'm like, do you guys like electronic music? And everyone's like, your music is stupid. Die. And I cry by myself.
Every now and again, I'll be like, here's a recovery tip, and I'll get like 50 likes. And I'm like, anyways, back to black metal. They're like, dislike.
Nobody likes black metal. And the people that like black metal don't do likes on Facebook. Like, the wall is dark. You don't deserve likes. All right. Maximus Decimus Meridius. I have a feeling that's not your real name, but we'll answer it anyway. Enjoying the book a lot. Any ideas on how to structure training when working night shifts for 4 days in a row with 7 days off after? Dude, Maximus, what kind of job you got, bro? Are you a merc?
Sucks.
Did you know he's merking people?
Yeah, I would say it depends on whether or not you can train on those night shift days. Like if you're willing to do that or not, that's kind of the differentiating factor. So like if you have time, like when you get off work and you feel like you can still get up and do your chores, train, stuff like that, then great, go for it. If you're wiped out because your circadian rhythms get fucked up every time that happens, there's not much you can do, and then you're just going to have to really push it on the days when you can't train.
That's what I was going to say.
Unload on the days when you're not training.
I would say that 5 out of the 7 off days, push it to the limit. 2 of those days, take easier off to prepare for or recover from, depending on how you like it, your 4 on days. During the on days, maintenance volumes.
You might, depending on your schedule too, like if you're, like I said, if your schedule gets out of whack, like your circadian rhythms get out of whack, you might actually preload with a light session just to get back into a rhythm, like in a routine, so that the next session you can overload. And then the last session before you go back on your night shift, you might take a light session to promote recovery. So you might kind of front and end load the light sessions and then boom.
Perfect. Cameron said, maybe I missed it, but yep, maybe I missed it. But how does a powerlifter structure their peaking block in terms of MEV to MRV? They don't. They go to MV. All you want to do is conserve your abilities. Your volume should conserve your tissues, conserve your strength. And now you're working MEV to MRV in your technical proficiency with heavy weights, which means MV for everything else.
Yeah, and actually there's kind of a cool thing with peaking and tapering here where because fitness doesn't decay as fast as fatigue goes down, you might actually drop below your MV for a day or two just to actually help alleviate more fatigue and elevate preparedness. So pretty cool stuff.
Yep. Jose Rodriguez says, can we use fatigue percent during training to manage MRV, MEV? What's fatigue percent?
I honestly am not sure. So Jose, if you are still tuned in, maybe clarify for us. It's probably something we know, just maybe phrased in a way we're not familiar with.
Yep.
Maybe by like looking at drop off on reps or something like that.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. Austin Healy. How do you quantify the various overloading techniques, drop sets, rest, pause, negatives into MAV, MRV planning?
You gotta do basically just by monitoring.
Yeah.
You gotta see how they affect you and understand what kind of straight set conversion they create. It's different based on the stuff. So for example, you may do a drop set every now and again, like as a part of your training. And you figured out over the course of multiple mesos that like this kind of drop set that you do basically counts for like 4 working sets. Then you know next time let's say you want to hit 18 working sets, you program 14 conventional sets and 1 drop set. But because there's so many different variables of how people do those things, there's not a one-size-fits-all formula. You just got to be honest with yourself and be like, okay, 1 drop set's just 1 set, right? So you do 20 drop sets and die the next day in a pool of your own kidney blood, then not great, right? But if you figured out that your drop set really does basically equate to about 3 conventional sets, then you can intelligently fit that into the rest of your programming.
Yeah, and even within the examples you gave, like rest pause might not have that crazy of a conversion to doing just traditional sets, but like negatives would be massive, right? Like what you can do doing like an eccentric accentuated or just doing negatives, not even close, right? So you just got to trial and error that one.
Yep. So built 82 F100 for powerlifting. How would you train a 5-day split, 2 days bench, 2 days squat, 1 day deadlift, 1 day heavy and 1 day technique for bench and squat and heavy deadlift except deload weeks? I mean, that's a fine way to do it. There's like 50 different ways to do a 5-day split. And it depends on so much. It also even depends on which days of the week you choose, because it's 5-day split. That doesn't mean 5 days in a row. Lots to say there, but I think basically you just understand the concepts. Remember we talked about earlier in this webinar about making sure that one session doesn't fuck up the next session, lining up the SRA curves. If you're able to present overloads, able to hit frequencies, you're good to go.
And also consider, right, like a 5-day split, you might not just bench on that day. You might also hit another light squat or something like that. You might double up.
Yeah. Don't make sure that you're structuring your days around overloading movements, not all movements. You can do quite a bit of variation there. Let's see. James, do a video stream of Shadow Vorsuit watching Murder Orcs.
It's awesome. Good. It's intense. Are sweet. Like, it gets you out of nowhere where you're like, and then you see this like hyper violent death animation.
It's amazing.
You're like,
My favorite part is when he starts really murking people that orcs are afraid of him.
When they run,
they're like one guy's head will blow up and the orc's like running up to you and he's like, nope. He just turns around and runs back. He's like, holy shit!
This.
Or like they actually have shock. Like you blow up a guy's head and all the other orcs are like, like wait a minute, nobody pays me enough to be here.
I love the Nemesis thing too, where there's like you got a guy out that like you have beef with, and he's like, you fucked me up last time, but I'm coming for you.
You know what I'm saying? No, you're not. You little bitch. All right. Let's see. What are your thoughts on using data collecting technologies available for figuring out MRV, like a Tendo unit which measures velocity, or something like Omega Wave, which tend to be more complicated? I don't know if Omega Wave works all that well, but I will say, until James really messes up this question, this is his area of expertise, Tendo units are fine to use if you are diligent with them and the numbers mean something to you.
Yeah, the thing with the Tendo units and stuff like that is that there's no real clear established drop-off point for a lot of these things. So, and this is something that I've said, and I'm going to keep saying it until somebody proves me otherwise. For it to really be meaningful, you have to generate force velocity curves for all of your exercises over the course of a huge spectrum of loads. So you have to hit all of the hypertrophy rep ranges, all the strength ranges, all the power and speed ranges. And only then can you really have a good idea of how much drop-off is acceptable. And the thing is, there's not really any scientific literature that has given us really concrete numbers where they say, okay, 90%'s okay, or maybe 87%'s okay, or 83%'s okay. We really aren't sure. So can you use it as to monitor some of these things? Yeah, but you also could just have like a shit day. You know what I mean? Where like you might just go in and something your coach is like, all right, press as fast as you can. And you're like, fuck off, man.
Yeah.
Like, get out of my face.
Or just reps in reserve and how the bar's feeling.
Yeah.
You know, one of those things. So Mike Teixeira is famous for using Tendo units and other such technologies. And Chad Wesley Smith's been asked a bunch, like, why don't you use that stuff? And, you know, is Teixeira just wrong? And he says, Mike Teixeira is brilliant. The thing is, the Tendo stuff means something to him because he's so good about data collection. He knows all the data points he's supposed to hit. But if you don't know your data points, you're just like, oh, Mike Teixeira, he's strong. I'm just going to buy a Tendo unit. And you run it, and you're like, 0.7.
What does that mean?
Cool.
Yeah.
That's not going to do dick for you.
And
if you're going to invest in it all the way.
Yeah, like the reason he knows what those data points are is because he's collected a fuckload of data,
like 10 years of
and
stuff.
you gotta keep in mind, this isn't just like fun recreational level stuff. This is tedious, arduous data collection and consistent monitoring over time. That's the downside of that. So
one of the world's best powerlifters, it's worth it to him.
Yeah, I think there will be a use for that someday, but right now the like practical implementation cost to benefit ratio is just it's not quite there.
Yep.
In my opinion.
Yep.
So let's see, data collection. We got,
It keeps refreshing. There you go. There.
Andres Orco says, what do you think is a drop in performance when it comes to increasing weight reps per micro? Let's say week 1, 10, 10, 10, and then add 10 pounds in week 2, 9, 8, 8. Would that be a drop in performance to you? Well, so what you can do, Andres, is actually go and do a 1 rep max calculator, and it's online, and it's going to give you like the 10 rep max derivative, and it's going to give you 8 rep max, sometimes 6 rep max, 4 rep max, 3 rep max, etc. Those numbers should all line up. But for example, when you're benching 220, if it said 220 was going to be your 10 RM based on your 1 RM, and then it said 240 was your 8 RM, if you get to 240 and you're hitting hard 7s, yeah, 240 is your 8 RM and you're good to go. If you get to 240 and you're hitting hard 4s, you're off.
Yeah.
That's it.
The other thing too is like you also want to work within an operational range unless you're doing strict set by reps. If you're doing strict set by reps, then yes, that would be a performance decrease as you have listed it. But more than likely, you're probably going to be working in a range of reps like 8 to 12 for hypertrophy, for example. So, you know, if you get like 10, 10, 10 and then 9, 9, 8, you're still in your effective range, right? Which is what your goal was. Now, if you start going up in weight and you're getting like 7, 6, 5, 3, now you have deviated significantly from that range. So that's what you want to do.
Another thing is being honest with yourself. You know, you can say, well, you know, 2 weeks ago I hit this for 10s and now it's 15 pounds more and I hit it for 6s. But like, you know, I had a couple more reps in the tank, and you know in the back of your head, like you didn't have shit. Like you barely walked out. Like, yeah, then, you know, you just have to be honest with yourself and be like, really? It was just, I'm underperforming, right? But if you're not underperforming, don't cut it off and say, oh, it's my MRV. You look like, you know, so some people will be like, oh my God, you know, I squatted 315 for 10s like 5 weeks ago, and I just squatted 335 for 10s, and I don't even feel fatigued. Am I like, you know, people get scared, like, should I keep going? Like, yeah, motherfucker, keep going. You seem fine to me.
Yeah, what do you
keep going. You will know at some point. Look, here's the deal. MRV is not a magic number that after you cross it, you die. So if you weren't sure this week, honestly weren't sure if you passed MRV, but maybe, do another week. That second week, if you're over MRV for 2 weeks, you will know. That second week will just fall off to where it's unequivocal. Like, all right, squatted 10s for 315 2 weeks ago, and then I did 330 for 5-3, and then I couldn't unrack the bar. Then you're done for sure.
Here's the other thing too that I think people forget. You know, like when you exceed MRV, or even when you hit MRV, it's not just like something like, oh, great, I'm going to log that in my notebook. It's like it's transient across your life, right? It's something like you can't do your job, your family stuff. You have a hard time doing the rest of your life. You know it. There's no secret. There's no like, oh, I think I did it. It's like I'm having a hard time just getting by in my
systemic
normal life.
MRV, absolutely.
It's like,
yeah, you'll know. You'll know.
You guys know how you're super excited to do another week of training. You'll know you've exceeded your MRV when someone's like, do you want to train next week? And you're like, I'm quitting lifting. Fuck you.
Like you just like the meme of the guy throwing the papers up in the air, like, fuck this.
Fuck this. And you're not
Just
even
kidding,
coming
I
back.
need these.
No, I don't need these for another week. I'm good. You actually like sign a membership, like you cancel your membership from the gym. Next week you come in, you're like, I'd like to apply for membership. They're like, no, you're still a member here. I'm like, no, I canceled last week. You're like, all right, sir.
Okay.
We do this every mesocycle. It's just getting old. And like next, they just tell all the staff, like next time you try to cancel, like don't actually cancel me back.
just not do it.
Welcome back, Dr. Hoffman. Your membership is still here. Like, oh, thanks, folks. All right, let's see.
You got
Fatigue
back to
percent. Mike Teixeira technique for generating fatigue in a movement based on RP drops in an equivalent load, RP matching for a lighter load. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's exactly what MRV is. It's like at this load, what am I supposed to be feeling?
Yeah.
If I feel way shittier than I'm supposed to be, or a light load isn't working when it's supposed to be light, but it's heavy now, clearly you're underperforming and you've exceeded your MRV in all likelihood.
And this is just a sidebar, but like, don't, it's like, this, I'm not attacking you, Jose, in any way. All I'm saying is, like, sometimes they come up with these terms that are like overly dramatic and sciencey. Like, it's RPE, right?
Yeah.
Like RPE is fine. RPE works great. There's no, so like sometimes people be like the Hofmannistani like fatigue measurement system.
We're
squared.
idiots, dude. We should have put our names into these fucking concepts.
I know,
man.
right? Like, so I'm just saying, like, sometimes you see stuff like that, and it's like, what is it? Oh, it's just RPE. Oh yeah, RPE works.
Yeah,
great.
totally.
You know,
Yeah,
like,
yeah. And so, and the fatigue percent is a way to use that. That's totally cool.
yeah, absolutely.
We're gonna, guys. Thank God you tuned in for the webinar. Here's the deal. We're gonna rename these fucking concepts. Maximum recoverable volume is now going to be known as Mike recoverable volume, and then MEV is Hofmannistani. It's like down. It says Hofmannistani, and then it's MEV. That's how you read that shit, and then we will make stuff up. By the way, MV is open for bidding, so if you want like to have the Emmanuel MJ Enriquez recovery concept, that'll be MEV. You know what I'm saying? If you want it, it's up for sale.
Do you want to check RP Plus? See if we got any questions over there too.
Let's.
You want to finish these? Do we finish these?
I think we finished these. Let's finish these for good and see if RP Plus has anything for us here. I feel like RP Plus is just a ghost town.
Yeah. Nick Shaw's like, hey.
All right.
Well,
what's up, blank page?
what?
Google.
What
Really?
the-
We are computer literate. What a creepy background, JMO. What the fuck's wrong with you,
I
man?
know.
That's a very metal background.
There was a Google one
The
built in. It was like,
trees are darkness.
do you want cats or metal? I was like, ooh. Damn.
Metal cats? The fucking, what is it, like the road winding into my soul?
All right. we got a couple
Daniel fucking hacker.
here. Okay.
Let us look. All right. So, quote out of our book, I think.
Penny's here.
Penny says, I'm here, but no questions. Well, get out of here, Penny. We want
Get outta
questions
here.
only. Get out of here. All right. To cause the best gains, however, that following stimulus has to be greater magnitude than the one prior. So a stimulus that's easier than last time, but still very hard, result in gains, but will not result in the best possible gains. And that says, concerning delete and replace, if one used an exercise, took it out, and then inserts it back again in a few mesocycles later, but cannot use more weight after the first microcycle, should they increase the set or repetition amounts from what they did last time this movement was in their mesocycle? Here's an example to make my question more clear. So meso 1, close grip bench, 3 sets at 195, 4 sets at 205, 5 sets at 215, 5 sets at 220 with down set at 190. And then a few mesos later, if one cannot increase intensity, close grip, 3 sets at 195, 5 sets at 205, 6 sets at 215, 6 sets at 220 with down sets at 195. I know how you both feel about bringing back novel movement slowly, but if one is not increasing intensity after the first week, should they do more volume than before to have some new stimulus?
For hypertrophy, yes. For strength, no.
Yeah. If you're not increasing in intensity and strength, you're programming for strength wrong.
Yeah, but for hypertrophy, that's fine. So, and there's plenty of times where I've had that similar situation in my training where it's like, I kind of shit myself last week on this weight where I was like pretty closer to failure than I probably should have been. I'm not going to increase the intensity, but I'm either going to add more reps or maybe just do another set.
Yeah. Make sure those numbers are still within MRV though.
Right.
Don't chase the stuff like, well, I got to present more. Remember, the recovery is a lot of times going to be a limiting factor.
Yeah, but that's okay.
All right. Next quote. Quote from the book. The big implication of this is that MRV can be quite different based on how an athlete is trained in the past or recently. This is important as it means that we cannot just assume that all beginners to hypertrophy training have super low MRVs. Very many no doubt will, as many beginners will be coming from sedentary backgrounds. The lesson here is not to assume without knowing the individual's broader and more recent history of training. So the question is, when first designing a training program for a new client, how do you know when to start them with a higher MRV? Wouldn't it make sense, no matter who the client is, to start them with a lower volume meso, seeing how they respond and just go from there? Yes. Well, would you design a hypertrophy program for a beginner that does not have? How would you design a hypertrophy program for a beginner that does not have a low MRV? I'll put you this way. If a person comes from extremes, we can make generalizations. So I think that if someone is, coming from some kind of background, we just assume the low end and work up. if you inherit a distance athlete who wants to start squatting a lot more and is abandoning distance, you don't have to start them out at 1 set of squats per week. You can start them out at 5. And you know their MRV is going to be higher. So remember, we don't start at MRV. We start at what we think their MEV will be. And their MEV can be much higher than somebody else because 1 set just won't do dick for them. They're used to so much more leg stimulus. And they can survive a higher MRV. What you can also do is climb faster. So if you know a person is highly trained in cycling, let's say, and they start squatting with you, you can still start at a moderate to low number of sets. But after they come back next week and they're like, I didn't get sore, you're like, well, fuck, you can add 2 sets at a time instead of 1 because you just know you're pissing away time. If you're uncertain how they're responding, go slower.
Yeah, absolutely. So like when I was coaching with the rugby girls at Temple, I mean, they would do easily like 12 sets of 10.
Mm-hmm.
Why? You look at that on paper and you're like, but their MRV, that's a crazy number. But they were all beginners, and not to sound insulting, but they were weak. They were squatting like 45, 55 pounds. For them, that's what they had to do.
They were beginners to lifting, but not beginners to running around. So they had good endurance, they had good recovery ability.
Exactly.
But so they had all of the advantages of having a high MRV, but none of the, so basically it was one of those things where their work capacity was really great. So but their strength wasn't. So they just, it's the ultimate combination of needing a shitload of sets.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Last quote. Likewise, the lower volume phase that follows both conserves the gains of the previous 3 to 4 phases, and in part by lowering fatigue and shifting fiber type averages to faster twitch, lowers MEV for the next volume of training phase to come. So the question is, if one lengthens their low volume strength phase, can they extend the succeeding hypertrophy or strength meso because their MEV is lowered? Possibly. Would they be able to train longer in the MEV MRV accumulation window? Possibly. As you mentioned, the purpose of resensitization is to allow a smaller stimulus to have a greater effect on generating adaptation. Totally. But remember, the longer you're in maintenance, the less time you're making gains. So you're buying time to make better gains by pissing away time you could be making gains. There's a trade-off there.
Yeah.
Not having a resensitization phase, definitely a bad idea. But trying to have the resensitization phase for too long just really, really essentially fucks up the mood after a while, because you're like, it's almost like this. It's like, let's say you have like a date with your girlfriend or something and you want to set up the perfect dinner. There is some amount of like, you can't just order Chinese and plop it out without a plate and be like, ta-da, that's bad. That's like not a resensitization phase. A good amount of prep for a good dinner is good. You cook the food yourself. You set out the good plates, right? But if she's like, hey, what time is dinner? You're like 12 a.m. And she's like, what the fuck? You're like, it's going to take me that long to make this perfect. Well, you pissed away most of dinner trying to make it perfect. That's just like taking a resensitization phase for 8 months and being like, oh my God, I'm going to grow so much.
Wait.
You're totally going to grow a lot, right? You're going to grow a lot, but you're not going to make up 7 months of that shit that you lost.
And I'm only going to bring this up because you said this specifically, but you said during a strength phase. So one thing that you can do is double pump, what I like to call double pump the strength phase, where you do a general strength phase and a maximal strength phase, because then you actually span a really, really big volume spectrum of actually going really, really low. And for people who go that route and they want to kind of do the power builder kind of style like that came up earlier, do the 4 to 8 rep range strength phase, do like a 1 to 3 rep strength phase, and then move into your next hypertrophy block. And then you'll get a really big, powerful effect from that.
Yep.
So that's kind of an example of how you might stretch that out. Okay. Ooh, Alessandro Zucchi.
Let's see.
Hey, boy. Your name's Zucchini?
Zucchini. All right. Dear Doctors Mike and Dr. James, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to ask you a question regarding total body MRV. Has been bothering me for a while, even before reading your new book, which I enjoyed very much. Awesome.
Thank you.
I'm what you call an early intermediate. I've been working out for 4 years, but even if all of them were done with consistency and dedication, only during the last one I followed Ramses periodization methods, which means that I made more progress in the last year than the previous 2 combined.
My man.
Super. Many times on RP Plus and the book itself, you suggest that an intermediate athlete should start considering emphasis and de-emphasis, different body parts, to prevent reaching systemic MRV before muscle group MRV. I believe my situation is quite normal for someone in my training experience. Few of my muscle groups are discretely developed. Most of them could use some work. Well, so it's not just really quick alteration. Most of them could use some work. That's true for everyone. Big Ramy could be double his size. I guarantee you he thinks that. So it's just about how we go about things, not how we prioritize, not that we want progress or not. No one doesn't want any progress. So, and then it says most of them could use some work, and a few of them are starting to lag behind. Even though everything could still improve, there are some areas that could surely benefit some from more work. My question for you, how can I know if it's time for me to start doing specialization work instead of growing all around? Before considering putting a body part in the back burner to grow another one, should I try less drastic approaches, training it first, improve technique, etc.? Always thank you very much for your attention. My quick answer is, yeah, try less drastic stuff. And if you don't like the rate of gains, start to trend the other body parts, maybe some of them a little closer to MEV, and still push these body parts between MEV and MRV.
Bro, you got to Bob Ross that shit. This is your world. The world is your canvas. You can paint it however you want. If you are looking at yourself and you're like, I want bigger guns, there's nothing wrong with doing a specialization phase for arms or for quads, regardless of what your training age is. Now, what we're saying is like, yeah, as you get more trained, the need for doing that kind of emphasis, de-emphasis style becomes more apparent, right? For intermediate to beginner, it might not be apparent at all. But if you're just doing it for aesthetic purposes, where you just say like, this part of my body or that part of my body, not quite where I want it to be, there's nothing wrong with that. That's totally cool.
Yeah. And remember, when we say that it's a bad idea to specialize too soon, we only mean that in the context of someone that eventually wants to be optimally jacked, whole body, way down the line. If you just want big arms now and you're okay for a little bit of sacrifice of hugeness, you can start specializing whatever you like.
Totally.
Tony Drotnell says, I haven't had time to read the book into the book yet because I don't like you guys that much, but it's staggeringly comprehensive and well formatted, even though I'm a mean person who doesn't read people's books. Great job. Thanks, Tony. And you don't have to share all that much personal detail.
Yeah. We actually had a lot of help this time. Mike's sister Sonia and Dr. Fiance did a really good job helping us formatting it because, Mike and I, we're good at putting ideas down, but when making it look nice.
Kinds of ideas.
Making it look nice. And
I don't know how to spell or write.
Neither of us do.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of help for sure. And it took a long time to get it right.
Before Mel and Sonia got the copy, though, James and I actually physically can't write or type. We had a highly advanced, trained fleet of monkeys that actually type out the words you speak, but you got to yell at them. So everything we ever typed, if you just say the words, they don't do it. So you're like,
Siri monkey.
Yeah.
No.
Volume manipulation. Listen, open your fucking ears up, monkey. Volume manipulation. He's like, and then it's perfect. He doesn't even make any spelling mistakes.
He flips it back at us like bananas.
You're like, oh my God, my monkey's broken. They send you a 9mm with the monkeys that if one of them breaks,
what was that South Park word like the
spelling monkey?
Spelling monkey. That's right. He had the drum kit.
He's masturbated instead after a while. All right, folks. I think we've timed ourselves out. So that's it for the webinar.
Yeah. For those of you guys who tuned in on YouTube, thanks for joining us. If you enjoy this format, this is something that we do at least once per week, sometimes more, on RP Plus. So if you guys liked being able to ask us questions live, we have a whole forum where you ask us questions every week. We pull questions from the forum, we answer them live, and then usually we have a little free time at the end to hit the live questions. Yep. So if you enjoyed it, please check out RP Plus. We have a whole, I'm just talking about the webinar, but we have a whole shitload of videos and recipes and tons of stuff. So if you enjoyed it, check it out. We want to thank you for checking out our book. We worked really hard on it. We're really proud of it.
We're really proud of it.
And we're really glad that you guys enjoyed it enough to tune in to the webinar to hear us assholes talk.
Yeah. Next time, we won't even talk. We'll have the monkeys talk. We'll write to the monkeys, and they'll talk. It's a harder impression to do because monkeys don't talk. Volume! I don't want to hear monkeys talk.
Planet of the Apes.
I've never seen any of the modern Planet of the Apes movie. Do you know why? Because I don't want to see a world in which humans lose to apes. I would love to see a Planet of the Apes version where the humans just fucking kill all the monkeys in like 10 minutes and everyone laughs and cheers and eats monkey skulls.
Monkey brains.
That guy, that motherfucker is who they needed. He probably died and then the monkeys took over.
The last movie trailer almost got me where I was like, I might be interested. The one where it was like apes together, strong. Like they played it, they brutalized you on TV with the commercials, and I was like, I might be interested, but then I was like, I haven't seen the other like 4 other ones, so
yeah. All right, let's get to the end, folks. It's been real, it's been fun, but as they say, it ain't been real fun. What does that mean?
But you can't stay here.
Yeah, that's how it goes.
Shit. Those
anyway,
2 different ones.
We usually end on an anticlimactic note. Why not this one? See you guys later. Thanks for tuning in.